approval of the agenda. Is there any public comment on the agenda, just add to the agenda?
I have a comment. At the end, it mentions the dates of future meetings, and one of the dates I think is wrong. It says Wednesday, June 16. And Wednesday is June 18.
Thank you for that. I had to typographic error. And pardon me, Pat pointed out, let me show that the roll call shows directors except for Edgar present. All right, I'd ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
I'd like to move the agenda.
Second.
Wasco Sullivan, all those in favor? Aye. Thank you. And now we'll move on to open time. This is for public to raise items not on this agenda or future agendas. This is not pertaining to tonight's main event, which is comment on the proposed rate increase. So does anyone have general public comment? Yes, please.
My name is Darryl Hayes. I live in San Anselmo. I wanted to go on record, please, as strongly opposed to selling the Larkspur property. I think that would be very short-sighted and foolish. And I further, in recognition of the meeting tomorrow night on the Larkspur plan, I would urge you to take a page from the First Lady's book and just let them know that you are saying no, because you have ample to do here without being embroiled in a very controversial project which will substantially burden the district's resources. And it is an extremely important question to deal with before the draft DIR is adopted. Thank you.
Is there any other general public comment?
Yes, do I need to go up there or can I stay?
Fine with me.
Robert Miltner. I represent the Dark Park Neighborhood Association, also known as Delaware Park, more formally. This relates to the Larkspur Landing project. And in reading through as much as I could stand to read of the draft DIR, I don't see much discussion, if any, regarding the effect upstream of the intersection of 101 and Drake, of traffic effects, maybe even of groundwater or stormwater. It's mainly focused on concerns about the immediate area. Anyone who's living in any of these box canyons, like the Drone Canyon, knows that the only way in and out is through a street intersection like the Drone Magnolia. It's already very difficult to get out of there, either north or south during rush hour. I suggest strongly, that you do not sell the property. There's a lot of evidence of public dissatisfaction. If you're selling it, we have a lot of other ideas we can use that property for. And please accept this as a vote for our neighborhood to register some sort of rejection of the draft DIR.
Just a point of information I was looking at. Does the DIR affect all property?
Oh, yeah.
Does it include that?
Yes. We're one of several that we call key opportunities.
No, I know that, but the environmental impact, it didn't really say very much about our property.
That's the point.
It's an inadequately written report.
All right, any other general public comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 4, presentation on proposed wastewater utilities rate change. Right.
Okay. Thanks, Mary. I don't have a remote clicker, so I will stand up here and try to go through it. So this is a very brief presentation. What it's doing is really just meant to sort of introduce and set up the discussion for this evening, which is obviously primarily focused on what's generally referred to as the Prop 218 protest hearing and remaining considerations and actions by the board on the proposed rate adjustments. So there's been a tremendous amount of information, studies and so forth generated over the past roughly 12 to 15 months. That's all out there in the public record. This is not an attempt to or to summarize that for everyone. So really just some very high level overview. But we are here, what we're here for this evening is consideration of the new rates and rate structures and the public protest hearing. So what I'm going to talk about briefly is starting back really at square one, very important. What were and what remain the basic objectives of the rates and the rate structure that we established about a year ago? What have been the information and process building blocks that the district has gone through to get to the decision point that we're at this evening? Very important, what's the best information we have today about the summary financials, knowing there's uncertainty when you're looking 3 to 5 years in the future, but what do we know today? Very quick recap of what are the new rates and changes to the customer class. Just a very simple comparison. This has very limited usefulness, but everyone typically, for good reason, likes to understand, well, where do we stand? Where are we relative to the Joneses? Which in our case means, what are other utility districts doing, and how do these rates compare? Which, again, I emphasize is very limited because of how many considerations go into that between different wastewater utilities. What are the intended beneficial outcomes of the rates, and then essentially what happens through the 218 process next steps. Okay, and I apologize for the angle there. Hopefully it's not too hard to read. These objectives, this is a partial set, but it's a set of objectives that we established about a year ago to help guide what constituted a successful set of rates and rate structure. Knowing that it's not very difficult to quickly get caught up in some very subjective considerations. So these are them. Financial stability to meet the capital project needs and the operations and maintenance needs of the district. Rates should be proportional to cost of service. You should be paying for what you're getting. And you and your neighbor and different customer classes should be seeing equitable charges based on your cost of service. There should be efficient administration and utility billing. We don't want an overly complicated and burdensome rate structure. We ideally want to minimize what's referred to as rate shock, which means really rapid, long delayed in most cases, rate changes. It's an industry phenomena. We all try to avoid it. We do the best we can. I'm not sure we've achieved that in this case, but it was an objective all along. The rates should be clear. They should be understandable to you as the customers and the property owners within the community. And we decided that they should reflect the strategic use of bonds, which is very common, of course, in the utility industry, which is a very capital-intensive industry. So you use bonds to smooth out your long-term cash flow and financials. And in our case, ideally moving the district over time to what's generally referred to as pay-as-you-go. So you're not so dependent on debt, and your annual income is closer to your annual expenditure, and you're really taking care of business on a consistent basis. It's hard to get there overnight. Not a lot of utilities achieve that, but that's part of what this is intended to do over a 5+ year window. Lastly, or next last, make sure we're in compliance with Proposition 218 and other state codes. And then finally, for the district, this is a unique requirement. We're under a quite extensive and stringent cease and desist order from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and it delves into these very specific matters. And so there are a set of compliance requirements that the rates or the financial resources that they provide do need to meet. So those are what we considered the objectives for this whole exercise. So how did we go about this? Well, first thing we did was we dug ourselves out in late 2012, early 2013 financially with the emergency loan. In 13-14, which really means April, May, June of 2013, the district put together a new budget with a whole new format and a plan to get the district back to financial health. And everything you're going to see after this are steps that were planned and reflected in the budget and the plan that was put forth back in mid-2013. So the first one was what we call the near-term debt restructuring and bond issuance, which was completed. And it did what it was intended to do. We retired our near-term debt, and we funded the current fiscal year's capital projects so we could meet the minimum requirements of the state enforcement order. So that did what it was intended. The next thing we said we were going to do is we're going to develop a new approach to the capital program, which really drives the financials of the district. And that takes the form of more acronyms. The Infrastructure Asset Management Plan. Think of the Asset Management Plan as an updated capital plan, and think of the capital plan as what really drives the financials, because that's where the money is. We were successful in getting support and approval by the Regional Water Quality Control Board for that revised, substantially revised plan, with a really high level of discretion and flexibility granted by the regional board based on what they saw in that plan. Very important. Based on that, we then went forward with a 5-year financial forecast that said, okay, now that we know what the capital needs are, and we know that the capital needs drive the financials, we can now do a meaningful 5-year financial forecast. We completed that in October 2013. It was discussed and released, and it's been, again, it's fed into the next step, which was the rate study. The rate study was started early this year. It was completed a couple months back. It incorporated everything you see preceding it, the 5-year financial forecast, the capital planning, and so forth, and came up with proposed changes to both the rate structure and the specific rates to provide basically finances that work with everything above it. Then we went to really the step that we're in now, which is we put the proposed rate updates and the rate structures out to the community through the Prop 218 process as required by state law. And then what's happening this evening is the completion of that process. There's going to be what's called the Prop 218 protest hearing. We'll go through some formal steps here this evening. We'll announce the total number of protests, etc. This will all be happening as we go forward. And then separately from the 218 process, the board will then consider in the form of a rate ordinance the actual rate update. And that's all on our agenda, but I just want to give everyone a sense of how the meeting will unfold. Okay, so what did the 5-year financial forecast tell us? One thing I already told you, capital improvements, which are driven by the regulatory requirements, drive the financials. 93% of all the new revenue is driven by the capital costs. Operations and maintenance, which are significant, and they involve personnel, which people pay a lot of attention to in the public sector these days. Not that it's not unimportant, but the overall increases for the next several years are about 1.5%. They're important, but in general, they're not the most important. They don't drive the financials. Again, we're looking at the use of bonds, substantially lower than past proposals from the district that were in the $100+ million range, and we're looking in the mid-60s at this point for the current financials. We had a revenue forecast, overall revenue growth of about 7% per year. Now that doesn't mean rates, that's overall revenue, which includes the use of bonds and other revenue sources, but it was a rough guideline where we were headed. The district adopted specific reserve targets so that we could begin to build some resiliency and get out of this short-term game that we've been in for the last 5-6 years, where we have some strategic reserves, we can absorb some shocks to the system occasionally. So we established policies that might take 5 years to achieve over time, but it was important to adopt the targets. And what's the primary uncertainty and risk? It's a 5-year forecast. We don't have a crystal ball. So where the risk and the uncertainty is, largely, is in the scope and nature and cost of the capital projects. To a lesser degree, because we are nearing the end of our current labor agreements, they come up in 2015 for renegotiation with unions. There are some operations and maintenance uncertainties in the form of labor costs, but really, again, if you ask yourself, where is the uncertainty and the risk in the district's 5-year financials? It's primarily in the capital program. This is the schedule of rates. I know it's not real easy to read, and I think this is exactly what you have in you received in your Proposition 218 protest notice. So I won't go through these individually, but it's a 5-year schedule of rates. It does address the 2 different rate zones. Ross Valley is about 80+% of our customers. Larkspur has a slightly different rate structure. Most folks know the history on that, but it's quite simple. If you don't, we do not get any of the ad valorem tax from the county. So under the agreements that were established when the annexation was done 20-odd years ago, this is how it works. In order to compensate for the lack of ad valorem, we have two different rate zones, and the Larkspur rate zone pays slightly more, so that's why you see two sets of numbers up there. Where does the proposed rates put us with regional and local trends for wastewater utility service overall? Because the Ross Valley Sanitary District is not unique. Most of the challenges we're facing are common to the industry and are certainly common to the utilities around the San Francisco Bay Area. Aging infrastructure, hugely increased stringency of regulatory requirements in the last 5 to 10 years, and long delayed reinvestment in the capital. So those trends are common to everybody, but what does it mean? How are we doing? In the Marin area, if you look at about 17 agencies, the average is about $756 per year. The proposed rates, at least for the first year, put us about 9% below that average. So just to round off, say it puts us basically in the middle of the pack. When you look at the San Francisco Bay Area, there's a utility consortium that tracks all of this, of course. Believe it or not, there are over 100 different agencies that provide wastewater service around the Bay. 118 are in the survey. Average annual cost around the Bay Area is $737. And again, that puts our proposed rates about 5% below that, call it average. So I think the objective conclusion as far as where we stand relative to other utilities, both locally in Marin and regionally around the Bay Area, is we are basically average.
Is that slide accurate?
I assume it is, Rick, because I'm the one that put it together.
But the proposed rate on the slide before takes it to how much?
This one? Yeah, those are the proposed rates.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is if you look at the 14-15 rates, the first year of the increases, we're going to be, in all the different industry utilities, as you guys know, if you pay attention around our area, everyone's going through a series of rate adjustments. So it's hard to say what it'll be in 3 or 4 years, but if you just take the first step, which is what I was getting at.
The Larkspur's $961, and that's $200 more than the average.
Correct. Larkspur, 20% of the customers that's a good point. I don't mean to gloss that over.
Well, because
Larkspur has higher.
Yeah, because Ross Valley is the 1% out of our property tax. That's not the whole amount.
Yeah, you are correct. You are correct. And that's a unique situation with the Larkspur properties.
So those rates are incorrect on that
Yeah.
slide.
So generally, if you're using the averages, I guess you can interpret it that way. So
False slide.
basically, what happens next? How did we get through the 218 process? So in March of this year, we initiated the 218 process. We did the mailings out to the 15,000 plus parcels in the district. We got approval. In April, they went out. May 21st, which is today, what are we doing? This is where we're conducting the public hearing. The protest period, the 45-day protest period, will close officially here shortly. We will issue the official count of the protests, and then the board will move on to consideration of the new rate ordinance. Depending on the outcome, if there are new rates adopted, regardless, our fiscal cycle says that we need to be doing a draft budget, which occurs at the May 28th meeting. June, typically our new fiscal year starts in July, so in June we typically adopt our new fiscal year budget. By July 1, the cease and desist order requires us to submit to the regional board documentation showing that we've put in place sufficient financial resources to meet the regulatory requirements of the cease and desist order. And that specifically says showing that through the adoption of adequate rates. If that were to occur, the end result is probably in August of this year. As usual, the new rates go on the Marin County tax rolls, which is how the revenue gets collected. So that's the basic process that we're in the middle of. Okay, that's really all there is to the presentation. I'm not going to actually take questions because I want to hand it back to the board, and there'll be plenty of time, I know, during the discussion period to go into all this. So that is just a high-level overview of how we got to where we are. So Mary, I'm going to hand it back to the board.
But you are going to take questions.
Yeah, certainly, as we get to the next step. I don't
You mean
want
agenda item number 5?
How are you going to do questions?
That is the next item.
yeah. So as you guys, as there are, if you would prefer to, as people have specific questions during the comment period, we'll address them. But I didn't want to have it all go to that section. That's just a brief presentation.
I think he's saying, just for simplicity's sake, folks can ask questions about the presentation or about the race and zoning or the protest period agenda item.
Sure.
Or are you talking about board members' questions?
Yeah, that's
Yes, absolutely. Now that is what we're going to do. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't change that.
okay, Greg. I know there was some confusion about the multi-residential notification on our top 218. There was many people that contacted me, and I think you as well.
Right.
So I did not see any of the communication that went out from you to those folks. So what happened?
We did one consistent communication. So there appeared to be obviously confusion as to how condominium properties were being treated under the new rate structure. And it has to do with the use of the terminology, the multifamily, single family, et cetera. So the land use codes, et cetera, that we utilize in the rate study, the intent has been, and it's reflected in the proposed rates, that condominiums, duplexes, other attached single family residences, they do, because they're under that land use category, they go under the multifamily rate. And that was the concern people have had for many, many years, and it's come up in other communities as well. That was one of the reasons why the rate structure was proposed as it was, is that those properties have a documented trend of lower indoor water use, and therefore condominiums, duplexes, et cetera, other multifamily, what are generally referred to as multifamily, they fall under that rate structure. So we sent out a supplemental mailing just to the condominium folks who had sent questions in to help clarify that. And I thought the board got a copy of that communication. So if you did not,
I think I saw an email, but I don't know whether.
Okay, so the end result, Pam, of that was we sent out a clarifying communication to the property owners, which is basically the condominium people.
But we didn't notify all multi-residential people. Is that confused?
I think everyone who had everyone whose parcel fell into that land use code, or that group of land use codes, got a clarifying communication.
No,
Is that
not so.
not so? Okay, it may have just been the condominiums, because that's all we were kind of getting questions from.
Yeah, I have some concern about how we communicated on that issue.
Okay.
And some people were upset because they thought it was going to be too high. In essence, it's going to be lower. And so that kind of notification for rate increase. I'm just wondering what happened because we didn't have another board meeting, perhaps we should have notified all of the multi-residential people that affect this new rate.
Yeah.
Regardless whether they understand it or not, it just, to me, would have been.
Double check on the, looking for the window, I'm not seeing there. I just have a quick question. Is it possible, I want to make sure if we send it out, well, I don't know if this is, just a quick question. When we did the supplemental mailing,
Yes.
did we just do the condominium classification? Or
Yes.
did we do, okay, we did just do the condominium classification. So the folks who were in condominium classification got that, because those, again, it was the idea being that that was really who we were hearing from. It's a, well, I guess I won't go into too much detail.
Well, how many approximately multi-residential units do we have? Aside the condo?
It's less, I can give me a minute, I'll pull up the breakdown on our customer base.
But if I'm understanding, it's that folks who were in condominiums did not understand that they fell under the multifamily.
Correct, they thought they were going to see higher rates.
Right. So the folks who own apartment buildings should be clear that they fell under multifamily.
Correct. And
So that would be one reason why we only sent out the condominium first, because multifamily, no,
The
they're
last
much.
page of this.
That's a breakdown. And let's see.
Is that the rate report?
It's John.
Yeah, that's the rate report.
It sounds like two-thirds of the,
Yeah, out of 15,000, roughly 15,400 plus or minus parcels, I think we have about 2,500 that fall under the multifamily use codes. So those are pretty close numbers. Yeah.
Okay. So do you think we need to notify those folks?
Well, for everyone that sent us any kind of inquiry or question, we tried to respond both individually, and then we did a mass mailing to all the condominiums. Everyone else, I don't know.
well, I guess from a protest standpoint, if someone actually is going to get a lower rate, that would make them less likely to protest. I would think.
It's just confusion.
But it wouldn't
Period.
change the protest. If you're going to be angry and protest, you're going to be angry at the higher rate.
Well, you got the same emails, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't know what communication came out from the district. Other than you said you were going to send something out, so I didn't know what went out and to whom.
Okay,
And
I'd have to double
how
check.
it was communicated, so that kind of, and I just got so busy, I was going to ask, and I didn't.
Okay. I thought I had informed the board of that communication. If I didn't, that was an oversight on my part.
Okay. Okay, just quickly looking at the, I wanted to talk about the 5-year financial forecast really quickly on your slide presentation.
Okay.
I think it's, okay, so it starts with the capital improvements. Right. So
Yeah.
on the rate increase, whether it be 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9%, or let's just say, well, this is a proposal, by the way, tonight is 7%.
Say that again? I didn't quite.
Well, our percent rate increase, what, the size of reserves, I guess I wasn't clear at the meeting. I know we're going to, up to 15 million or close to that, and that was the proposal in 5 years. What percentage then of that rate was going to go all to the preserves out of that increase in the rate? Does that make sense?
No, I'm not sure I understand the
Okay,
question.
so you're going to increase the rate. What is it right now currently? What percentage would you call it? Our rates are.
I don't understand. What percent our
I
rates?
guess I'm trying to figure out how much money out of the rate increase will go to reserves, out of that percentage.
I don't have an exact percentage. We have a dollar. We have a 5-year target.
Yeah, I'm
amount of money.
just trying to figure out how much would stay within the district and how much would go into reserves.
Well, a simple way of looking at it.
Well, sorry, I can clarify. Under the current proposal, almost no money is going to go into reserves. We basically, we gave up some of that when we did the 1% reduction following the last meeting. So I guess John or Wendy at some point will go through some specifics, but at the moment, the best I can give you is a 5-year, what the reserves were intended to be in 5 years, but what they actually will be under the current proposal. I don't know if that's answering your question.
Kind of, but not really. Maybe John can answer it. Do you want me to go into this now, or do you want to go ahead and have
I guess my proposal for you guys would be to go ahead and, unless you have specific, anything detailed from the presentation, my recommendation would be to proceed to the public comment period.
Okay, and then I can come back, because some of these questions might be answered by
Yeah.
you. Okay, that's fine.
Other board members, questions on Greg's presentation?
Well, actually, Peter was pointing out the reserve fund balance line graph shows I'm pretty sure you built in the 1% that we talked about last time into this graph. So,
Yeah, I have those figures, I actually put on, if we do 7%, we'll have about 15 million in 5 years.
the difference between these two lines,
Mhm.
the points here, it kind of puts it more in the ballpark of 1.5 to 2 million in reserves. Is that what you're saying? I mean, this is a rough estimate from what I see on the chart.
Yeah.
But there are two numbers. One is the minimum number you need to not go broke right before the rates are collected and the next 10 years left. And then the next one is the buffer that you'd like to build, which best practices say should be around 5 million. And because cutting the rates down to 7% increase is going to be about 2 million less on the road.
2 million for what?
The buffer between
Oh.
the absolute minimum you need.
Right, but at 7% in 5 years, we will have 15 million in reserve.
Probably 12.
No, I have the figures
Good.
from John.
Well, one thing, okay, so to be clear, and I know this has been an ongoing, maybe there's been a little bit of clarity on this. The financial targets we set, they involve what we call fund balances. Think of those as essentially cash flow needs. A good example of that would be for the operations and maintenance, we talk about a fund balance target. And that's equal to 6 months of our expenditures because we get our revenue in 2 big chunks from the county. So we go through long periods of time with no income and ongoing expenses. So we have a fund balance target. That is the 6 months of expenses. We also have a similar capital fund balance target. Those are separate from the reserves. The reserves are in addition to those. So as we get into this a little bit later, that will be an important distinction. We give you an important, like when we made the prior 1% reduction based on the board's direction earlier, we gave up a fair amount of the capital fund reserves, basically. So we need to, we'll talk about that in a bit more later on as you guys would like to get into it. But I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, Dan. Okay.
When you say, again, I have a question for you. When you say 7%, I mean, there are a bunch of rate categories, and is that overall, or is that single-family dwelling over the year to year to year to year? You know, when you say this is 7%, which is the number that?
Well, on the presentation, it says total rate revenue increases 7% per year each of the next 5 years.
Total rate
And I
revenue.
was curious, out of that 7%, how much of a percent was going to go to reserve? That's not.
I can't give you a percent number, yeah, because it's a cash flow, it's a little bit of money's going into the reserves each year out of the next 5 years, trying to incrementally build them up. So we'd have to back out the math, I don't have it. this
And
evening.
is the goal to understand if we were to reduce the overall by a percentage point, what would be the impact on the reserve? Is that
Yes.
what you want to know?
Yes.
So do you understand that?
Yes, and generally speaking, the rule of thumb roughly, John, correct me if I get this, is that for each 1% reduction in the rates, we give up about $2.5 million over the 5 years in the overall total amount of money we have available as the balance. That's everything. As Peter was alluding to earlier, if you're just trying to meet our cash flow fund balance targets, that number is about, I want to say right around a little over $13 million. That is not reserves, that is cash flow fund balances. So think of that as kind of the red line.
Per year.
No,
No,
total,
5 years.
Total?
total. At the end of 5 years, we have that much money that's still our cushion to operate,
Ah,
okay? It's not that there are no reserves, that's just fund balances. But the key number I guess you're looking for is every 1% in rates gives up about $2.5 million at the end of the 5 years in terms of our financial reserve targets.
I had a question about the way the ad valorem plays out, and when you talk about where we fall in the list of other agencies. So we're getting money from the county for every place but Larkspur. And then we charge Larkspur individual EDUs more to make up for that fact. Is that correct?
Right. Yep.
And so, to Mr. Holland's point, I think our rates are actually, because we are getting money from the county at these higher, what we bring in per EDU looks like the Larkspur rates. We just get some of it from the county per EDU, correct?
Yes, you can look at that from at least two different perspectives, and that is correct. And we talked about that extensively as we crafted the rate study and what's the most efficient way to talk about it. Philosophically, the concern, and also I think financially and technically, the ad valorem monies are not monies we control. They are not monies that have any planned connection with our actual cost of service. They are just monies we get under this historic arrangement. They're tied to property values, and they're tied to state policies and so forth that we have no control over. So they're very nice to have. They're a very important part of our financial foundation, like many utilities, but they are quite distinct from rate revenue in our ability to actually manage them, logically match them with our cost of service, and so forth. So certainly, again, they're an important part of the foundation, but they are a very different source of revenue, so I tend to resist trying to mix and match the two.
And do you, when we look at where we fall compared to other agencies in the Bay Area, are there other agencies that have a similar setup where they're getting ad valorem
Yes.
from the county? So those numbers, we are comparing apples and apples.
We didn't attempt to distinguish that over 100 agencies, but yes, it varies. It's a patchwork of approaches around the different agencies.
Thank you.
So, and it's not just one, it's fire districts and school districts and all kinds of places.
I have a question that's related to this topic, and I've never had it answered because I never asked it. So, when Larkspur used to manage this portion of the sewer system that we annexed in 1993 and further ratified in 1995, the agreement was made for the ad valorem to stay with the city. At the time they were managing their sewer system, do we know if they had an enterprise fund just for sanitary sewer management? And the reason I ask that is that ad valorem was, its origin of collection was toward an enterprise fund, I'm assuming, not a general fund. And if that were the
It was in
case,
response to Charles Gann, Proposition 13. It was the backfill money that was lost from the Proposition 13.
okay, but if they were getting that amount of money, it was going to their enterprise fund to manage their sewer system. They were technically a sanitary district at one time.
Right, but I think the ad valorem tax, as it goes to San Rafael and things like that, is not specifically designated to the sewer.
Well, that's still plenty to know.
There was a
You're sure
great,
of that?
I reviewed all the paperwork from the transition. There was a lot of money put into a fund to balance things out because there was a lot of work that had been done on the Larkspur pipes to bring them somewhat up to the level of the rest of the district before the transition occurred.
Right.
So there was a lot of money put into the fund.
So I guess you understand where I'm going.
Right, but it doesn't matter. That was the agreement. So
Right. Well, I know that it was part of a special enterprise fund. That money could be used only in certain ways. And that's clearly not the case. That's
No.
all.
So we've kind of inherited a 20-year-old agreement. I think folks know the politics behind it at the time, even were quite complicated. It's what we've been working with.
it's to my detriment.
Okay, any more questions on the presentation or item number 4, or are we ready to move to item number 5? All right, item number 5.
Is there public comment on 4?
Jolie,
Sure, it's on the agenda, you get 3
Okay.
minutes.
okay, opening up to public comment on item number 4.
We're calling Fairfax. And the frustration, of course, is for the last 6 years, we've had misinformation. And as you know, this has all resulted in the general manager going to jail and you guys misspending at least $25 million. So we've lost 6 years and there's some hope that things are improving. But 2 questions. The study, so this presentation, HF and H Consultants, a rate study, and 2 issues I have, and thank you, Mary, for bringing up the point about the ad valorem. But first of all, we're looking at a rate study. You're looking at increasing our rates, and to my knowledge, it was never asked of the consultants to look at other revenue sources, such as the sale of the Larkspur Landing property, which 6 years ago, the district lost $20 million from a breach of contract. So it could be sold. In 6 years, you haven't managed to put it back on the market to sell. There's at least $10 million that could be made from that. So all you've asked is how to get more money out of ratepayers. You haven't looked at how to get money out of property of the district. So that's not a good omen. And second, that in that slide, when you do a comparison about our rates, and this morning I think in the paper we had Sausalito's rates, right? What's the Sausalito's rates going up to?
Oh, they went up $50 the total. I'm not following this.
About what, $450 a year, whatever?
It's not a lot. There's only 23 miles of public sewer.
Okay, so our rates are $300 more than Sausalito's, $200 more than Corte Madeira's. Whatever it is, the fact is that ad valorem, you look at Larkspur's rates of $961, and you're saying the rest of Ross Valley at $692, but we know because, and again, I told this board 6 years ago that they were going to see a decrease in the ad valorem tax. Brett couldn't understand this, but I said because of lowering property taxes, you're going to receive less money. What happens? You receive less money. Now property taxes are increasing. You're going to get more money. So in actuality, over last year, this year, next year, you're going to be receiving more money from the ad valorem taxes. First, you don't want to include that in because it's going to be more money that's coming into the district. But it's just the misinformation and putting this out there to increase fees, yet you don't look at other ways of obtaining money, and it's misinformation about the money and the comparative rates for the rest of the Bay Area.
Any other public comment on this item?
Yes, hi. My name is Steve Lamb. I live in San Anselmo. I just have some questions about the report. One of the things that the rate study said is that each year the board does a budget and they may choose to implement a lower rate if things work out that way. So one question is, does that mean that they may also choose to implement a higher rate than this did?
No.
And then the other part of that is, in a given year, say the second or third year, if there's a lower rate, how does that affect future years? Does it automatically lower those rates so that you get the 7% increase year to year, or do the dollar amounts stay the same?
Do you want to
Yeah,
answer
I can try to address that. So first of all, that is why we have tried to make such an important point about, if you look at the board package, there's some language added to the draft ordinance that speaks to this. So first of all, the concern is if you adopt a multi-year rate set of rates, are they just on autopilot? How do we know you're not actually, if there's an opportunity for them to be lower, how do we know that you're just not going to be lazy and let them stay high? Well, so first of all, the public record on that is mixed. There are local districts, even here in Marin, that just in the past year or two have done what would be considered best practices. They've reevaluated their financials every year, and even though they had an approved multi-year rate schedule, they didn't make the full adjustment because their boards looked at their situation and said, you know what, now that we have better, newer information, we don't need to make that high of an adjustment. We can make a lower adjustment, and they've elected to do so. The hazard we're trying to avoid is that autopilot approach. So What is in the draft ordinance is a set of very simple steps that requires the district to always use a rolling 5-year forecast. So every year, the 5-year forecast is updated with the best information. And it largely tries to tie together the budget adoption process, the annual consideration of any rate changes, and the reevaluation of that rolling 5-year forecast. So rather than making financial decisions in a piecemeal process, which I think at the risk of being critical, and that's not my intent, I think that's the track record of this district and many others over the last many years. But you can see what the results are. When you disconnect revenue, costs, and policy, and you don't keep all 3 of those kind of together on an annual rotating basis, things tend to get out of line. And that's kind of what we've experienced. So the short answer to your question is there's been mechanisms proposed that every fiscal cycle, this district has to look at its new draft budget, the proposed rate adjustment, and the most up-to-date 5-year financial forecast, and make a determination that that rate adjustment is still necessary. And if it's not, what's an appropriate lower rate adjustment to be made? So the intent was to put some real meaning into that. It's still draft. It's what'll be before the board this evening. But it's a well appreciated hazard or risk, if you want to call it that, and it's one that we would like to avoid or not have occur at this district.
But the key question Steve asked is, if we do lower it 1 year, I'm not
Oh.
if the board lowers it 1 year, can they bump it to 10% the next year?
No, you can only, 218 sets a ceiling. It sets a ceiling. You can't go above it. So if for some reason the board in future years said, well, instead of 3%, we want to do 5% or whatever it is, if you go above what's been passed, you do have to go back through the 218 process. So it's a cap.
Is that cap on the percentage or the dollar value?
Dollar.
Okay.
It's these dollar values. We couldn't go above
Okay.
these dollars.
Right.
We can't move it around.
So there's a potential there for it to be lower 1 year and then go back up to the limit the next year. There's a possibility for
If there's
that.
some sort of unforeseen occurrence or challenge, maybe.
And then the other question about the, this is a good one, the RWQCDO.
Just call it the water board.
The water board.
What are the, so they gave you this cease and desist order and they gave you a list of requirements. What are the consequences if those requirements are not met?
Well, they don't specify in the CDO, they don't typically do that, but they're the regulatory agency. They have a whole range of enforcement mechanisms, from fines and penalties. They range quite extensively. What this cease and desist order has done, which is unique to most, if many, is that typically when there's a violation of a cease and desist order, and the senior staff at the regional board think there's been a violation, they take it back to the San Francisco Bay Area Regional Board, the appointed members that meet in Oakland. And they say, hey, we think discharger X violated the regulations, and here's what we think you ought to do about it. The cease and desist order that we were issued has a special provision that specifically eliminates that step and says that upon violation, the executive officer is free to elevate the matter directly to the state attorney general's office. So they inserted that factor, that condition into our cease and desist order at their discretion, and that is what we have. So they don't go back to the San Francisco Regional Board, they go straight to the attorney general's office.
If they want.
If they want, it's their elected thing. So it has some fairly unique features.
The first letter we got from them said that the fine could be as high as $39 million.
Well,
That was the first letter. And then that led to a lot of discussions.
And then, as I recollect, it was kind of in a response to us not voting to move a rate increase.
Or show you could sell the property.
On this agenda item, public comment?
I think so.
Okay.
Tim Eckey from Fairfax. I'm not opposed to the rate increases at all. I'm just opposed to, the last time I stuck my head in one of these meetings, it was about a flow rate, a flow with you paid for what you had treated.
usage.
The usage. The house, the single family dwellings look fine. It's the multifamily dwellings, when you time this by the number of units, that's just a killer. So 600, like I said, I spoke the last reading about the floor, and I thought it was great that you're going to pay for what you use. But when you have, like we have a little 5-unit building with 5 toilets, with about 6 people living in this stuff, and we're paying $3,200 a year for sewer, and they don't use any more water than our house. They're not getting any water treated in our house. I don't know. My question is that ever going to be looked at again, as far as the flow rate for multifamily? I'm sure that the people that have the bigger units are just, they're not all that happy either. But it doesn't seem equitable with the amount of use of the water, and so that was my comment. It's my protest, and it's my question to you guys: is that, does it seem a little out of whack when a little duplex is paying twice as much as a house that might be maybe with twice the usage and twice the bathrooms? Is that a little out of whack, and is that
It's a challenge in the industry that I don't mean to make light of it. It's a challenge because there are real significant pros and cons to approaching that, and this, different areas of this community have been through some of that. The district took a step in this proposal to move us closer to what we think is greater equity for that. That's why the new rate structure has about a 10% drop or difference between the multifamily and the single family. It was for that very reason, because taken as a class, the water use data that we looked at over the last 5 years from MWD substantiated the sort of gut level instinct of a lot of people that said, hey, indoor water use in these types of buildings is not as high. So we were able to take an incremental step towards that direction, which is similar to what some of the other regional utilities are doing. But we're not in a position, or this is what our study concluded and our recommendations were, that we're not in a position to go to what you might call purely flow-based rates. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that I won't reiterate this evening, but I will say the concern is heard loud and clear. It was a big part of the effort on the rate structure study, and the incremental progress we thought we could make in this rate cycle was to adopt what's called this differential flat rate, where those types of properties are paying under these new rates about 10% less on an annual basis.
Well, I'm glad you're recognizing that, and hopefully it'll. Thank you.
All right, I feel as though we should move to the actual protest hearing, because I think that we're moving closer to discussions of how people feel about the rate proposal.
Not the study.
Right. So I will move on to agenda item number 5 and say that we are. This is the protest meeting. We are closing the 45-day notice window for our Prop 218 notice of rate increase. I want to hear from every single one of you. We want to try to limit folks to 3 minutes. In my experience, most folks don't speak for 3 minutes, and few people speak a little bit more. So I want to hear what everyone has to say. And everyone can speak, however, only written protests will be accepted and then tallied during a break to determine how many protests for the rate increase we have. This is the last call for protests tonight. And after we hear from the public, we'll bring it back to the board for discussion. Is that okay? Okay. So I'd ask folks to just come up to the podium, name and town, please.
And I will
tell us what
try
you
to
think.
do, I'll try to do timing on the timing. So, remind me if I don't push the button.
Steve Lamb, Senator Samo. I just have a question about the idea of the counts. When you're looking at the total counts and the majority of property owners, are you looking at just the total service area, or do you look at individual parts of that, like say that Larkspur zone or the Ross Valley zone? Could one of those have a majority and the other one not?
It's the total
boundaries of the Ross Valley Sanitary District, of households contained in that, so you can't, yeah, it's not by district.
Okay.
Is that what you mean?
Great, thanks.
I'm Basha Crane, I live in Kentfield. My present rate on my property tax bill, I'm paying 16% of that bill to the sewer district. 16%, and if you raise the rates in the next 5 years, it'll be 32% of my entire tax bill. We already have the highest property taxes in the state of California. There was a big cartoon on that the other day. Would this water district get more revenues if your water rates were based on how much water the ratepayers use? Would you get more revenues if your rates were based on water usage? In other words, if I use more water than my neighbor, I'll pay a higher rate. You were thinking of doing that at one time. Have you ever looked into
Well,
it?
the short answer is yes. I mean, there's a certain revenue, overall revenue requirement to cover the cost of service. And the district can try to recover that in multiple different ways. And earlier, I didn't go through that, but we did a couple of public workshops on what we call the rate structure options. And those vary from the simplest, what we call purely flat rate, similar to what we have now, to where every property pays a fixed amount, to where at the other end of the extreme, your entire bill is tied to your metered water usage somehow. And one way or another, but the point I want to make is regardless of which of those approaches you take, the end result from a financial perspective still has to be the same amount of revenue to cover the cost of service. So the one answer to your question, I guess, is it would depend very much on you as an individual and your property, your individual water use patterns, but that's a very simplistic answer. It wouldn't be correct to say that we would collect more revenue if we did that. We would have to collect the same amount of revenue. The distribution would just be different if we were able to go to a flow-based.
But the highest users, water users, would be paying the most. Yeah.
That would be the principle, yes. Yeah.
Also, another source of revenue would be a parking lot at Larkspur Landing, the 10 acres you have. You could make a giant parking structure there and get a big revenue for forever. Thank you.
Laura Lovett from Larkspur. I have several questions. The real basic one is, if the pipes are 100 years old, why wasn't anybody in the district starting to replace them 50 years ago? Why are we facing this situation? I just don't get it. How long has the mismanagement gone on?
It's not uncommon, across the United States.
Just take responsibility, Pat. You guys hear that?
Everybody has to pay for it.
Well, I can try to answer. Well, yeah, please.
The rest of your questions and then yours.
No, I'd like to.
Okay, well, no. So what you've done, your question is an excellent one, and it is as people have already mentioned. The lack of reinvestment in the basic wastewater and, by extension, or most people put them together, water and wastewater infrastructure in the United States and in California and in Marin County is extremely well documented. It has been studied, it has been tabulated. The American Society of Civil Engineers, the Environmental Protection Agency, various state agencies, you can go online and you can get any number of reports that will help you figure out the tabulated backlog of lack of reinvestment in this infrastructure. We're part of a much larger pattern here. So to the extent that this district failed to make those reinvestments, that record's probably pretty clear. If it's of any comfort, which I'm sure it's not, we're part of a very large group of utilities around the country that have faced the same situation. It was piping is underground. It's characterized very commonly as out of sight, out of mind. It's hard to miss a pothole. It's a lot easier to miss a leaky sewer line. I mean, that's one way to look at it.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
To be fair, when Gerald Page sued the district 10 years ago, we were putting, the district was putting in less than a mile by a year in a 200-mile system that required a minimum of 4 miles a year to stay even, and probably had a 100-mile backlog of undone pipes. And that was 204, 205?
No, I started it in 1999, and the reason I started it was there was an average of 3 sewer spills a week in this county. And I was watching the children go to school, and the sewer people are out there with brooms shoving the stuff back down the drains, and the kids are walking through it to school. And I said, okay. And I started.
Based on another property that's 2,500 square feet, it's 4 times as much.
Yes.
And no wonder. It's just, it's wrong. That's in my simple, analogy.
The point is well taken. It is a big deal for the industry.
Thank you.
We have a solution.
Hi, my name is Rick Adler. I'm the Larkspur. And I too protest the method of calculating instead of unit. It should be flow-based for several reasons. One is, if you did do a flow-based method, contrary to what you just said, you just take the amount of money you need for the year and divide it by the number of gallons that are used in the whole district, and you come up with the same amount of money you get. It's proportioned out according to people's use. Very simple, easy to do. I can guarantee you can get a lot of cooperation from the water district, because if you go to a flow-based method, people will start conserving water a lot more.
Yeah.
And when they start conserving water a lot more, they're going to start using gray water a lot more. When they start using gray water a lot more, they're going to put a lot more into their garden, and like I do, put it in your toilet. And you're going to have a lot less water going into your sewer system. It's going to cut down your costs a whole lot, because half of your cost goes to the central processing unit that processes the sewage before it goes into the bay. Whereas where you currently have it, it's like these other people have said, and like I said, it's very unfair, and you're not going to get the kind of cooperation. You're going to be a big government, 1%, supporting the 1% on the backs of the rest of us. Because, for instance, I brought my water bills, and they have a chart on how much water I use. And you can see I use about 10% of what my area uses for water every year, month after month, because I have done all the appropriate water saving methods. And of that 10% of water that I use compared to the other people, most of that goes into my garden or into my toilets. Very little goes into your sewer system, yet you charge me $1,700 a year, which is 50% of my tax bill. And it's going to go up, because you're going to be charging me $2,000 a year. But that's not the end of it, because everything costs more than you think, and everything takes longer than you think. And so it's going to be up around $3,000, $4,000 a year is what you're going to be charging me pretty soon. However, if you go over the flow-based method, I'll be paying a lot less. But my neighbors, some of whom are quite wealthy, about a third of this county is so wealthy that they're not going to notice. If you tripled the rates, they wouldn't notice. Just one less dinner out for their friends, one less bottle of gourmet champagne, one less day of skiing in Aspen. And a third of the county just middle class, and they'll notice, and they'll start taking precautions to use less water, which will benefit so many other segments of Marin. And then a third of the county is like me, almost no income, and we'll be forced out of our homes. So we're going to really go after the water conservation. So,
Mr. Adler, you're at 3 minutes.
yeah, right. Yeah, you probably don't want to hear the rest of what I have to say. But I filed my protest because of that, and I think you should count it as 2 protests because you're charging me for 2 units. And if you don't, then it's taxation without representation. It's unfair, rigged election. If I had enough money, I could take you to court and take the whole election from that. Because it's an unfair way of counting the votes.
Yeah.
I'm Sandy Goldman from Kentfield. It's my understanding that sanitary districts, unlike cities, have a legal obligation. They're not just answerable to their constituents, they have a legal obligation to maintain their systems so that it keeps the sewage contained. Clearly, although the Ross Valley Sanitary District isn't alone in this, your system is leaking a lot. When each of you was sworn in, you swore to uphold the law. So please enact a reasonable rate increase as proposed and obey the law.
Rick Holland, Fairfax. So people know that the protest is futile, because you're never going to get enough people to come out to have the ratepayers cancel the fee. So we can hope for some transparency and act, hope for realistic numbers. But for the first question that was asked, and none of you gave an answer because you didn't want to put yourselves on the spot. In 2007, you had a 10-year plan on how to fix the pipes. It was supposed to start in 2008. What happened? The district failed. And we had a 10-year plan, and Tom Gaffney, right here, helped develop the plan. You hired somebody, and you were not able to perform. So what you're saying, again, today is trust us. Yet the performance of this district is abysmal. We've had people that have been on here for 8 years, but not implement the 10-year capital improvement program, have a former general manager in jail. So why are things different now? We've got 2 out of the 4 so-called reform board. Fortunately, we won't be seeing you around much longer. How about we wait until the new board is in place to change this district around? Because obviously, you have not been able to make the necessary changes, and as people have pointed out, the mismanagement continues, and until we see a real change on the board, we're not going to see different in the outcomes. Thank you.
My name is Alan Berland, and I've lived in the Ross Valley for 47 years. And my wife and I have the honor of paying sewer taxes, sewer charges in Kentfield and Larkspur. And we object to the rate proposed because it's not based on fairness. We've heard a lot of discussion today, and it's obvious that people here are mad as hell because it's not fair. There is no justification for a flat rate based on single-family homes. As an example, we have a little house in Larkspur that has 840 square feet, 1 bathroom. A little old lady of 80 years old lives in it. We pay the same amount of sewer charges for that as an 11,000 square foot house in Ross with 6 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, with a bunch of kids and live in it. Where is the fairness? Where is the equity? Now, I know the general manager says there are all kinds of reasons why we can't go to a flow-based system. And I note that, in the notice of the meeting there, he says we can't go to a flow-based system because, quote, Wastewater flows from each parcel are not metered. Therefore, the district uses a common approach for wastewater service rate, charging an equivalent dwelling unit. Well, this is disingenuous at best, because in fact the district does use a flow-based, but for commercial properties. Somehow the district is able to go through its machinations, this higher math, in order to figure out rates based on indoor water usage for commercial properties, but not the residential properties. The vast majority of the ratepayers in this district are residential. And I would hope that this district, that you members, be fair and equitable and change the system to a flow-based rate. Clearly, there's an overwhelming feeling for this. And as the manager just said, everyone should pay for what they are getting. And clearly, we are not paying. It is unreasonable, and we urge the board to reject these new charges. We can have these charges, these costs, but at least base it on a flow-based system. That is fair and that is equitable.
Thank you.
Tim Eckey from Fairfax. And I understand what you're saying about the flow base being a minimal 20% amount of the water, of the sewer fee. And that it's minimal with, it's 80% of fixed cost. And I would just like to plant a seed with you guys to hopefully consider this. If the 80% is based on, the 80% of the budget is based on you need a finite figure every year. You don't want the flow base going in and out of it. That you maybe look at square footage of homes, numbers of toilets, numbers of sinks, numbers of people in the homes, which would maybe help out somebody who's living in a very small house, paying the same amount as somebody who's living in a 10,000 square foot house, or some apartment building that has 5 people versus, a house that has 10. So if you would maybe consider a flow base that you say is minimal, but is fair, very fair, that you also consider down the road. I know this is kind of late on this thing, but some way of getting equity into this, making this equitable to all of us about the 80% of your budget, how that is best split amongst huge houses, small houses, very populated houses, and very, somebody in there in a single house of a single person. So just to plant a seed that, because it is out of whack on the multifamily, I'm not opposed to any of your rent or your rate increases, but I just think this thing is just out of whack still. But I do understand that the flow base is going to get you a very minimal. You can bring it back into a very minimal range. So, just that's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Can I just?
Do we not equal
No.
have a second?
No, it's not a
I'm
debate.
sorry, Ms. Crane. I think we're going to
All right.
limit folks to one.
I just had one little question.
All right.
Caroline 46.
Can't you use MMWD's, bills to figure out who used what? I mean,
That would be the way.
MMWD has all the
We do
records
that now, Ms.
of the flow.
Yeah, that's what we do. Yeah.
Or commercial.
Yeah.
That would be the way that.
But that's, you could do
it.
it for the residential.
That would be the way to do it.
I would like to ask, why is Larkspur rated the rate so much higher than the other cross districts?
I'll defer to Greg to explain that.
Well, we kind of went through that at the beginning of the meeting. It has to do with the conditions that were set back in the early 90s when the city of Larkspur decided to divest of its wastewater system and have it annexed into the Ross Valley Sanitary District. The way that annexation was done and the agreements that were set, the city of Larkspur retained the ad valorem tax proportions. And so ever since, there's been a need to say, okay, well, basically, how do you make up the loss for that ad valorem tax? Because the other 80% of the properties in the Ross Valley service area, we receive ad valorem tax from Marin County. So it's sort of, it's a historic situation that was inherited from the annexation agreement, and it hasn't been revisited since.
The need is still the one, does it can't be changed?
Well, in fact, someone in Fairfax, for instance, is paying the Larkspur equivalent because their taxes out of their ad valorem tax are added into the regular sewage tax bill. So they are indirectly paying the full amount, as the column pointed out. The Larkspur decided that it needed the ad valorem tax to run the government, and in fact they use every penny. At the last council meeting I went to, they had a budget so tight you could probably tap it with a drum. They use every single penny. And so at the time of the decision in the early 90s, they said, you know, sewage system go with God, but it's going to cost this much extra for the citizens of Larkspur. So you and I and Hillview pay the extra money.
Anyone else?
I'd just like to say that I'll vote for, and I'll get all my neighbors and friends to vote for anybody running for the board that will go to a flow-based system.
We actually voted to go in that direction. All our discussions with the rate, and I'm leaving in a month, so it doesn't matter, but all of our discussions on the rates were to move in that general direction. It just is very, I mean, it's not a simple situation, especially this year, for instance, when we would normally use the January, February water bill for flow. That happened to be a very dry period, and people were watering their lawns and filling their swimming pools and everything like that. So it would be a terrible estimate of what the wet weather internal use would be.
Do it for the whole year.
Well, then all the water that's going into the landscape and everything like that gets down into the sewer, and it's not. So it's very. I just say it's very complicated. We had 2 workshops on it. We spent hours on it.
So you leave us with a complication coming out of the
Yeah.
All right, I would, yes.
Ask for last calls of any protests that would be submitted in writing, or give them to the board president or to Ms. Miller. And also under Prop 218, and I know everyone will laugh, but this is the time that you could also remove your protest. So you have an ability to provide your protest, or you can withdraw it if something happened today and tonight you wanted to withdraw it. So I would just like to let the public know it goes both ways tonight. So
Also, that emails do not count.
that's in our protest policy, and it was also in the notice.
Okay, just so people know. I have a copy here of a protest, but there's more than, I see a copy laying there, and I'm not sure.
Wendy already
The
has
original went back.
Okay.
The Alan Berlin made it in, yes?
Yes, it did.
We got copies and they got the original.
So
Thank
call
you.
for the last.
Okay, last call for a written protest to be submitted. And then I bring it back to the board for discussion. Is there further discussion on the Prop 218 protest hearing?
That's after the count.
No, I'm hearing your question.
We're just discussing, just any comment on the hearing process?
But we're going to come back to the board to discuss before our vote.
Yes. So, seeing none, I'll move on to item number 6, and I'm officially closing the minimum 45-day protest period for Proposition 218 public protest hearing on the proposed 5-year schedule of wastewater utility service rates.
I have a quick question, just a clarification. If there's no vote tonight, do I read that for the
No, what will happen tonight is after we take the break, we'll tabulate the protests, pursuant to our policy, and we will accept the protest count for the Prop 218 hearing, and then we will move on to the next item. But it will be done, and if we take a vote on the ordinance tonight, or it doesn't, and we don't vote on it, the 218 is done.
Stays done.
Stays done, voted on
That's
it.
all I wanted to, thank you.
All right, thank you all. We'll take a break to tally the protests. All right, thank you. I'd like to call it back to order, please. Second meeting. I have 3 this week. All right. Okay.
Thanks, Rick.
Greg, I took this. You want me to just read this?
Certainly.
Okay, I have the protests in my hand. Shall I just read this?
I would just read the statement, yeah.
Okay. On April 4th, 2014, Sanitary District Number 1 of Marin County caused to have mailed 17,087 notices of a public hearing on wastewater utility service rates to take place at 6 p.m. on May 21st, 2014. Any parcel owner within the district can send in a written protest, regardless of whether or not they are currently receiving wastewater utility service. During fiscal year 2013-14, the district billed a total of 15,361 parcels for wastewater utility service. In order to have a majority protest, 7,682, which is 50% plus 1, written protests would need to be received by the close of the public hearing. At the close of this protest hearing, 128 written protests were received. This represents 0.83% of parcels receiving wastewater utility service. This is not a successful protest.
Surprise, surprise.
So, now we move on to item number 8, consideration of adopting ordinance number 65, setting sewer service rates. I'd like to open it up for board discussion.
Can we demand a recount under number 7?
We get up to 1%.
So the ordinance is in the board packet behind the presentation. And I'd like to open it up to board discussion.
Do you want me to go through any of the highlights?
Of the ordinance?
Of the ordinance? Or?
Sure, that's all.
If you, it's to the board's pleasure if you don't want it. I would just say that this is, again, a comprehensive ordinance, and in the future years, I think we've gotten all the bugs out of our ordinance over the last few years. In maybe the next 5 years, or if we go to another rate program, we may only have to amend the section that has the rates, but this year we're doing a whole new ordinance because we have definitions, we have some procedures. But the main sections are section 7, which establishes the 5-year rates that would be in effect July 1st each year. And we would be providing a 30-day notice or reminder. It's not a protest, it's just a reminder that the rates would be going up. The other section, which is new, is section 8, and that is the section that Greg alluded to earlier about the yearly review, and to see if the rates for the next coming year could be modified. And again, they can only go down; they cannot go up above the maximum. We did add the assessor's use code for the customer classes, which will be helpful in assigning.
You're on page 8.
I'm on page 5. That's section 9. And then,
Wait. So did you say page 8 a minute ago?
No, section 8.
oh, section.
So on 4 we got 8.
That's that yearly review, and it is in the ordinance, so we will be required to do that every year, but it does not guarantee that the rate will decrease, but it gives the board an opportunity to review it annually. The other section is section 11. It's the refund of sewer service charges. We've actually clarified the refund procedures for property owners that have found out that they're paying and they're not actually hooked up. And that is, we've had a few of those over the last year, and the process has been a little, it varied at times. And then because we do have the commercial with the flow-based component. Section 12 provides for an appeal if their flow, if they have a discrepancy or they want to make an appeal about the water use estimation. And I believe that is all of the big changes to this ordinance. And again, we're just trying to fix some things from the past. So if you have any questions, I can answer them.
Does that apply now to just the commercial property?
The appeal?
Yeah, the appeal for sewer use?
Yes.
Yeah, but eventually, as we do more flow-based, it will...
It would go to, yes, every time if you have a flow component, you definitely need an appeal provision to see if there is something wrong with the flow estimate.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so I wanted to bring forth some of my considerations. Being on the campaign trail, I've been talking to a lot of people about this issue. And a highly regarded elected woman confronted me and she said, tell me the most cost-effective measures your agency has done on all levels. I'm not talking about CIP, and Greg, I appreciate your summary of those cost-effective measures. Those are pertinent and they are on a broad scale and they are more future-oriented. And so that deeply affected me thinking about what cost-effective measures, what else have we looked at or considered? And I know 3 years ago when we were at this place, staff did furloughs for 1 year, I believe, on Fridays. And we did turn down a $100 million revenue bond because we did not have a plan. So I want to applaud you for pulling the IAMP. I don't like to say IAMP, but it is really clear, it's concise, it's telling the public what we need to do, what we didn't do, and now we're catching up. But I feel awkward and I don't feel comfortable to vote tonight. And some of it has to do also when I did advocate the 7%, sort of a blind faith statement, but we had no figures before us, there were no comparisons, and we did not have the comparisons of the districts. We have that tonight, which I appreciate, that is helpful. So looking at cost-effective measures, so the thing that struck me the most is that this agency 4 years ago had 19 employees. We now have 38 employees. 5 of those jobs are not currently, they're not hired, right? There's 5 that are open. I'm not sure what
it's varied. There's fewer than that at this point.
And we have not done a work study staffing analysis of why do we have this many employees? What kind of I think I wrote some notes here. You know, how efficient are our employees? And I hear great things like people are just working so hard and they're working, you know, but I don't know. I don't really know. I don't have those numbers. I don't have those specifics. And it behooves me to vote on a $64 million bond if we haven't covered all of our bases. So I know we probably can't maybe get this done within a week, but I want, if you could go back to your staff, and I did the same thing 3 years ago, and ask your staff, where can they do cost-saving measures? And it can be from very small things to actually larger things. The other aspect of this is cross-training. I haven't a clue what, I know a little bit on your cross-training efforts, but we have 4 secretaries. I don't know what, I kind of know what some of them are doing, but in an agency this small, do we need 4 secretaries? The same as the guys out in the field. Are we covering our bases to be really cost effective on what the ratepayers are paying? And a lot of businesses do this all the time. I don't think we've done that and they come in and they sit and watch, or however they do that. So that sort of struck me pretty deeply. And if we don't have these 5 positions being used right now, are we using temps or? And
So that number's varied throughout the year. That was the most we had in weekend. But so just to be clear, at this point, I think we're down to only, I think either 2 or 3. But generally, the intent has been to not fill them until we were very clear on the purpose and need and what that position would be doing. So we've certainly not just automatically gone out and rehired positions until we were really clear what we needed.
Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of a sort of an example, is not knowing how much money, and the same with the bond. I believe I asked a question, can we really do that aggressive a capital improvement? I did not get a clear answer. It was like, I think so, and I understand how the second bond would fly. You would roll, if you didn't use up the money in the first 3 years, it would roll into the second bond. So it just kind of seems like I would really like to cover more cost-effective everything if we're going to ask the ratepayers to pay more for the next 5 years. It impacts their lives, and I just want to cover our bases. The other idea I've had is, what about if we did some sharing of staff for the JPA? In other words, if we had an electrician, could we share with all the agencies? It would be, S2, San Rafael. To me, we have to start looking at regional costs as well as just us as a one little special district. If we're really going to say we're cost effective, and we're asking the ratepayers to come up with a big rate increase and a big fee. Last, what have we done to look at grants? I got an email from an elected sewer district person, I don't want to say who, and she's saying that Governor Brown, because of different issues are coming up with wastewater and the drought, and that there's a lot more grant money out there floating around. You just have to pursue it and be there to be watchful for that. So I don't know if we could get some grant money. Another item that sort of caught my eye on sharing is our SCADA system. I believe in the past we were going to share, and then Mr. Richards pulled that away. There was some talk about it. But again, it's another cost-saving energy force that if I just have to cover my bases before I can really feel that I'm being fair to the community. A couple more things included in my comments are we do not have a strategic plan. Not that we cannot move ahead without one, but it does help govern our mission and how we're going to project who we are and what we're moving. The IAMP does a really good job of capital improvements and designation of what pipes and the priorities. But us as a district and how we present to the community and building trust and going forward, it needs to be done sooner than later. And I know it's going to take, and I've been complaining about that for months.
Well, I think we've, you're not the only one. Right.
Pat's
So,
got a
with the
degree in it.
opportunities to take those seminars that teach strategic planning, it'd be good to make sure that more board members in the future actually attend these things, so they can really learn how to help implement them. That's something that's been on the burn out for 5 years, and we still can't pull the trigger on that. Well, hopefully you guys all will. I'm just a confident board.
Yeah, and the last about our property, if it is a potential revenue base for lease or however the board decides, but it is the people's land, that is another cost-effective measure. So that last item is more out there because the land needs to be cleaned up and all that. But these are ideas that I have been struggling with the last 2 weeks, and I had to bring that forward. So I'm not ready to vote tonight.
I think we're gonna vote, so you would have to vote no or abstain.
Well, and also, we're not a full board. We're not a full board.
No, you can vote no or abstain. We've gone through an extremely logical process for 3 or 4 months. We went through an extensive planning process to see what our capital needs would be and how to best invest that money. We developed a financial plan. We submitted it to the state. The state was very happy that we did the financial plan and said, please come back in a month, June 1st, and tell us exactly how that plan is going to work out. And all I'm seeing is a lot of focusing on one tree or the other while the forest is burning. We have to spend $100 million to fix this district, and it's all capital, and it's not built into the current rates. We have to raise the rates to get the money to fix the district. And to talk about whether we're going to have a furlough or whether we're going to have a parking lot at Larkville Landing that might need $200,000 a year in the face of $100 million worth of work to be done, just doesn't, it just doesn't calculate for me. So I just am the exact opposite end of the spectrum.
I, been trying to get us to fix pipes now for 8 years, and we've been pretty successful, on average about 3 miles per year. Had a couple of years downtime in the last couple of years when we couldn't get some rate increases approved. So from more of a layman perspective, as far as maintaining these things and building them, I know the district better than any of these candidates that are coming up to the board or anyone that sat on this board. And I know the condition of your system, and now we've further refined it with a really innovative solution known as an infrastructure asset management plan. It's widely received by peers in the industry outside of our parameters here. The caucuses that have occurred through the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, many of the retired engineers that ran local sanitary districts and sanitary districts of Florida, the State Water Resources Control Board, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, have embraced it and actually gotten behind this program, which has been created here, of actually assessing the most urgently needed pipes to replace or rehabilitate. So we've targeted what we need to fix now. That's in our 5-year plan. So to drag our feet once again and backtrack on what we have to do as mandated by the state is irresponsible. And I'm hoping that people can find it within themselves to approve this rate increase to get us on track. And I can appreciate cost-cutting needs. I can appreciate the fact that we can always look at that and say, yes, we can do that. And say yes to many of the things that Director Meggs has said. Should it hold up this vote or put in jeopardy the possibility of not being able to meet the required mandates? I do not believe that's the right way to approach it. Hey, what I've learned in this industry is when you get fined and when you get your feet held to the fire by the state, they levy some pretty hefty fines. So that affects change, whether we like it or not. The way I see it is if the place goes the heck in a handbasket because of a few people that are going to hold up the process, okay, I know that the state or the Regional Water Quality Control Board is going to come in and, of course, ratchet it up. Of course, the other things can happen too. But the fines are exponential. They're not necessary, and we've been required to do this work. I can't blame it on anyone in particular group. It's a cumulative total to me in my mind. You've got a public sewer system that has regular flows of 4 to 7 million gallons a day. Okay? When it rains and the groundwater becomes completely ambient and surrounds all those pipes underground and structures, it goes up 12-fold. We're paying for that. Think about that for a minute. Treatment costs go through the roof, okay?
the pipes need to be fixed. If we fixed our pipes, we can't do it right away, overnight, no way. We can at least spend the money to fix them. We kept our rates down. It was $200 when I got here, $234. I have a single family dwelling with a house full of kids that are still at home and they're in their 20s. I'm going to be paying huge numbers. I have to. It's my responsibility. I'm finally going to pay my fair share. If it's no, it gives you no solace. I understand that, but I have to walk on this. The bottom line is we have work to do here, and we just touched the surface of it. To completely turn our back on our responsibility is absolutely irresponsible. So, enough of my preaching. I'm not running for office. I will be supporting Director Meggs, Mr. Gaffney. Hey, she did it for a while. I'm supporting her now. This is a good forum. And also Mike Bornstein.
You're not
I'm on my way out. Sorry, Chris.
Can I clarify something? I'm not saying I'm not going to vote. I just want to get that clear.
Okay, well, we've got deadlines.
I just, you know how I am.
I do.
If I feel there's some, if there's some waste going on in the district, and we're asking a big jump on people to come up with more money. I had a guy call me today, this is an example, and I'm a very feeling person. The guy said, my landlord's going to raise my rent because your sewer rates are going up. I can't afford it, I'm going to have to raise. Those kinds of stories make me get kind of like nitpick crazy and start to realize if we're a public agency, then we really have to look at everything. I'm not asking for furloughs. I am going to vote. I was asked maybe for 1 week, let Director Egger come back and do whatever he needs to do, which I don't know, by the way.
Well, he publicly said he was going to vote no.
He's already told us.
So it doesn't matter.
Well, anyway, he is part of the board and elected and all that. But I just wanted to see if there's some way, maybe we can add that into something, make people feel more comfortable. The other thing I'm wondering too is on the,
We're not going to postpone a vote.
no, you can vote.
Thank you.
But I'm just asking if we could continue it to next week to address some of those issues. And also look and consider at, on the bond itself, the first 3 years is $40 million. And I'm not sure we can handle $40 million by the time you get all your consultants and specialty people. And, you know, it takes months just sometimes to do an RFP. So I was wondering if we could lower that first bond and then regroup in that 3 years to do an extension. That was another idea I had. And 7% does bring the reserve down from 18 million to 15 million. I know it's a slow build on the reserve, but it does help the ratepayer come down a little bit. Was it like $30 or $20 a year? Something like that. So that does help crunch those numbers a little bit.
And again, when you say 7%, you're talking about the whole, all categories combined together. Is that right? In the first part of the meeting?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's taking into consideration the time when we do get our funding that comes in through rating taxes.
Yeah.
And that lull between
Yeah, there's a lull.
infusion. So that's when you're really letting that number, it's not 15 million at that point.
Right.
So you're messing around with about $2.5 million for a few months as
Right.
reserves. And so if something unplanned occurs, you'll be out looking for some money. Just take these concepts into consideration.
Yeah, but we will have, if we have 40 million in the first 3 years, that's a lot of money each year for capital.
I'm talking about reserves.
Okay, yeah, I
If you
understand.
spend 40, you don't have anything.
Great.
So, and I understand, you know, that we have to do something. This is a responsibility to health and the environment. So I am totally on board. I just want the rest of the board to hear me. It's not like I'm going to say totally no, I'm not going to do that. I just want to address these issues.
Pam, can I want to make sure you guys have the right pace of this discussion, but, so I wanted to try to address some of the high-level concerns, questions that you raised. But most of these are ones that we've talked about to one degree or another over the past year, but let me try and sum them up. So first of all, staffing. It's a common topic, and the district added staff rapidly for lots of reasons at the time that obviously seemed right to the people on the board. We were greatly expanding our activities and so forth. Now, there's no way any agency adds that level of relative growth and gets it just right, and especially when it's done, literally, essentially overnight or over the course of a couple of years. So I don't think anyone is going to stand in front of you, and certainly not me as general manager today, and say, yeah, well, we did, all those staff decisions we made were spot on. It's exactly what the district needs for the next 10 years. We recognize that. And we recognize that we made some rapid changes, and now we need to sort of figure out what's, we've also made other changes. We've made changes to our operations and maintenance program. We've made changes to our capital program. And now we need to figure out, we need a rigorous, kind of logical process to figure out, well, hold it. Let's take a deep breath. Let's look 5+ years down the road, and let's figure out what the staffing resource mix is to carry on the district in the long term. And then, based on what that is and any mismatches that we have, how do we get there in a steady, logical way? If there's one thing that I think, say with a fairly high degree of assurance is that dramatic, rapid changes in staffing, especially for public agencies, don't go well. Public agencies are just not set up. In the work plan that I know you haven't had a chance to really dig into it, but there's a reason why we made a big point of that in the 12-month work plan for RGS, Regional Government Services. In my view, amongst other things, one of the most important things that they're going to be assisting us with is they're going to provide us the horsepower to conduct the very review that you were talking about, which is let's look at the district, let's look at our operations and administration and everything else, and let's see what people are doing, let's figure out what our needs are, and let's come back with some quantitative analysis. That's at least a 6 to 8 month exercise. It's not an overnight process.
We have a budget coming up.
Right, and we can only make one decision out of it.
I want to see that budget before I feel comfortable about voting for this issue right at hand.
Okay, well, my point is this. To address the staffing issue is going to take time.
I know.
It is going to take some definable analysis that we can then bring forward.
But maybe we don't need those five staff, or maybe we'll need 2 or 3 of those staff. That will change the rate increase.
Right, and we might know that a year.
So I don't want to have a really high rate increase if we don't need it.
Okay, so let's recognize that there might be potential for changes in operations and maintenance costs in the future, but we don't know what those changes are going to be. Because
we might know after looking at this budget.
No, we won't, because the budget is only looking at this year, and the changes that you're describing, that I'm describing, are going to take 3-4 years to unfold. But if the point is, if the district commits to that study and commits to acting on the findings, that is the next best thing that you can do. That's the path to solving what is the right staffing mix for the district. Arbitrary changes are going to get you right back where the other arbitrary changes got you, which is not helpful. Same thing goes on the capital. The best information we have today says these are the projects that need to get done. If the district, if the board, look, you face uncertainty. You need a strategy for dealing with uncertainty. You have uncertainty in the capital project spending, etc. The way you deal with that is not to say, let's lock down the numbers and let's pretend they're not going to change. It's to say, let's have a process for regularly revisiting the numbers and updating our game plan. And that is what is in here. It says, nothing stays on autopilot. Every fiscal cycle, the district has to look at the new pending budget, the pending proposed rate adjustment, and an updated rolling 5-year financials. And if 2 years from now, you're in that exercise, and guess what? Instead of $15 million, we only spent $12 million. And we figured out staffing, and it only grew by X% instead of Y%. You'll have the hard facts then to make decisions about what the rates are going to be. Today, today, this is the best information we have. So my recommendation to the board is you take a strategy that says, I recognize uncertainty. I'm going to put steps in place that make sure I gather hard analytic information and I look at it and I act on it on a regular basis. I'm not going to try to predict the future. I'm going to act on the future when it gets here and I have the tools and information to do so. That's kind of the big picture answer to all of this, because the hard fact is I don't have any better information to give you than what you have based on tonight's, but based on the capital plan we have, based on the rate study plan we have. I can give you a better information a year from now when I know what we spent and what's going on with the updated staffing projections. I can't give it to you tonight, and I can't give it to you next week, unfortunately. If the board, from a policy perspective, commits to the process that we're talking about, that is certainly one way to help adjust this. In fact, it's the number one recommendation I would make to you guys, is to do that. Okay, a couple other quick things. Resource sharing, we're doing it. We're looking for more opportunities. There's a reason we haven't launched our new SCADA program, because we're trying to discuss and explore that with our JPA partners. We heard a lot about low income, or like the affordability. The Larkspur property is never going to be the silver bullet for this district's financials. It's simply not worth that much money. But from a policy perspective, down the road, if you wanted to say, hey, any revenues from that go to low-income assistance, then you have the option to do that. Basically, the last thing I'll say is grants. Yes, there's over somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million in grants in Prop 84 monies that are going to be released. Everyone knows it. Everyone's scrambling for it. That's a game that you have to be out in front of like 12 to 24 months. Your Johnny-come-lately to the state grant game, what you typically get is nothing. This district has not made it a priority to stay engaged in the grant game.
And you have to be shovel ready.
If we'd like to get engaged in the grant game, that's a strategic decision that we have to make. But these are things that have to occur over time. We have to make one decision at a time. I guess I would propose to you that you set a broad framework with these rates, and then you set in place some controls, checks and balances that make sure you make appropriate adjustments each year when you know the new reality of what's happening with the capital program, what's happening with staffing, et cetera. So that's my
Touch on one point. Please explain to the group the process of summary of state revolving fund reimbursement program.
Well, that's another funding option.
Right.
It's just another funding option. It's not free.
And it certainly is a laborious task.
Yes.
And you should dedicate bare minimum one staff.
Yeah, it's a low interest loan program from the state. It makes monies available for water and wastewater system improvements. It's not a grant, it's a loan.
It's viable, but the challenges with the state revolving fund is you have to dedicate just staff time for, it's a project management position and also kind of an accounting position. But the bottom line is, the state is not easy to work with. They lose paperwork. Then they tell you, yes, we received it, but produce it again. No, we want a hard copy, It can be really tedious and really challenging. We've done it in Sausalito recently. And it's all to get your capital project funding reimbursed if you're working on a really tight budget. But it is a venue. There's a couple of them out there, but I'm hearing from my peers in the industry, they really don't want to have to go through it anymore, especially with the amount of agencies competing for that money.
So what I'm hearing is that in concept we have your support. You reference the report that we need to submit to the State Regional Water Quality Board by June 30th, right?
July 1st.
July 1st. And that it's about public health and the environment. So, given that,
I think it's, and to have a full board present, so as well.
I'd like to
Would
make
I
a
open it to the
recommendation.
public?
I know.
After your discussion.
Okay.
But that would be, I think, right. It's going to take 5 years for people to share the full thing.
All right, well, I'll open it up to the public.
Point of order, does there need to be a motion
At some point.
Yeah,
to be discussed? Okay, but not,
they're in discussion and then they're gonna open it to the public and come back, and they can continue it, they don't have to vote on it tonight.
So do we have any public comment on this agenda item?
of course. Rick Holland, Fairfax. Strategic planning, if you'd wanted that in the past 6 years, I would have been happy to come and help you. But Mary knows that for 5 years, from 1997 to 2002, for the Public Health Institute, that's what I did for Mary Works. So 6 years ago, Pat, you mentioned responsibility, that if we don't take action, this district could go to heck in a handbasket. Well, 6 years ago, this district went to heck in a handbasket. You and your henchman led us down the road of $25 million of losses. He's sitting in jail. You're still here. You're going to be gone in a couple months. Thank goodness. Responsibility is having taken action and done something the past 6 years and not screwing around with the public's money. Over $25 million that you lost, you didn't put in pipes. So we need to look at what's going forward, what needs to happen. So let's look at that. How much money is needed for capital improvement in the coming year? You have a number?
15 million.
How much money is in the budget?
Oh, that's about what's in the forecasted budget, I believe.
Okay. But don't you have money in the budget for the coming year to do whatever projects are
No.
looking? No? What's the shortfall?
I don't know the exact number, but that's the intent of doing the bonds.
Okay.
We do not have the cash on hand to do the pay as we go.
But how much money to do the projects that are scheduled in the IMP? IMP.
Yeah.
You'll get it.
No, they're built into the capital program. So they're reflected in the capital program, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
But do we know that? You guys running offhand because there's money in the budget. We know that there's more money coming into the district because property taxes are going up. You got $7 million in reserves from the bond, so there should be $15 million or so. And you could, in effect, get projects going the next 6, 8, 10 months. There's not the necessity of approving something right now to increase funds. I think what Director Miggs is bringing up is that there's time. I mean, you guys can get to work. There's nothing stopping you from getting to work. And this whole thing the past 6 years has not been about not replacing pipes, it's about doing it efficiently. And you have failed. So going forward, how can we do this job better? It would be helpful, I think, for the new board to be able to make that decision and look at options. Increasing the staffing, we know that was done to have a larger district and to increase fees. So there are ways to decrease the cost of the district. There's no reason tonight to have to increase everybody's rates. Let's get a budget in place. How about a budget first and see how much money is actually needed, and perhaps a cost increase, fee increase of 3 or 4%. I just think we're acting, and I don't want to act the two directors pushing a decision because of their failures the past 6 years and to burden us with having to pay the district a bunch more money that we have no idea if it's going to be spent efficiently or not. Thank you.
Anybody else public comment on this item? Yes.
My name is Rick Adler. I'm in Larkspur, and I just want to say that I'm all in favor of improving the district and rebuilding the infrastructure and spending as much as necessary to do it. I just want to make sure that it's done in a fair way and the wealthy pay their fair share. So I was thinking maybe we could do a hybrid flow-based thing where every parcel, every unit pays a certain amount, flat fee, say $1 a day. That's $365 for every parcel each year, and the balance comes from a flow-based rate.
Any other public comment?
I want to ask staff a couple of questions.
Sure, I'll bring, yeah, for the next one.
So Graham, just want to just get this question out of my head. When we first got the rate percentage increase from you, there was just one figure. And I don't understand why we weren't given, like, are you saying, I know it's down to 7, but could it possibly be okay at 6, or is it just lowering the reserve a little bit? That's all it's doing, right?
Well, no. At some point, the reserves are gone, and then you're cutting into the basic cash flow fund balance targets and so forth. You kind of cut off a little bit of whatever little bit extra we have, which is the reserves.
But we don't have those figures.
We roughly do, just from the policies we've set and the financial projections. The minimum, again, I think I mentioned this number earlier. If you think of our cash flow needs separate from reserves, you need to be looking at numbers where the district never really dips below somewhere in the neighborhood of about $13 to $15 million.
Right.
And that's not for reserves. That's
your,
monthly cash flow.
Right.
And I know that sounds like a lot of money, but what folks should understand is we literally go 6 months where we might incur $5-6 million in expenses that we pay as we go, and then we get our money. It's a terrible cash flow model. That's how it is. We get our money in 2 big injections. So there's a very practical reality behind that. It's not mysterious. That, and the same thing goes for the capital. So I guess from what I can tell, I've been trying to huddle with Don and Wendy and others the last couple of days, is we really have kind of run out, of much more flexibility until we start talking about removing some fundamental things from the financial plan, some certain amounts of capital spending, et cetera. We are at a point now with the current proposed rates that basically leaves us well short of our reserve targets. Boy, I guess I'm just going to keep coming back to this point, because you guys hired me as general manager. I'm going to try to give you the best advice I can. You don't know what the numbers are going to be in 2 or 3 years from now. If you have a fixed process for rigorously updating and making timely changes, you will have the opportunity to make these rates as minimal as possible. That to me is what needs to be your basic strategy, because, for example, again, all of the issues you raised earlier in your comments, Pam, they're all very good issues. I wouldn't dispute a single one of them in terms of their potential relevance and impact to the future finances of the district.
Save a couple few million.
But we don't have answers this evening, and we won't.
I know.
And that's just the reality. So I wish it were otherwise. A district, and this is, I guess I'll just make this point, because I've managed other districts and I've seen different situations. It's nice to be in the situation where you have flexibility and you have the capacity to look at alternatives and so on and so forth, and I've been there. It's really great to be in a situation like that. Our district has kind of lost that. The last 6, 7, 8 years, whatever you want to pick period of history, my hard reading of this as a general manager is that we've forfeited, we've given up a lot of that, the flexibility and the discretion to say, well, let's look at alternatives and let's have these plans. We've backed ourselves into a corner, and this gets us moving out of the corner the best way I know how to do it. If I had a better answer for you guys, I would give it to you, and I am not opposed to compromise. In fact, professionally, it's something I really take pride in, as well-crafted compromises. If I could find something to work with, I'm more than happy to try and bring it forward. Right now, I don't have anything. So that's it.
Well, I wanted to say something, actually a couple of things. One, I'll be off the board in a month, And so anything that I'm doing now is basically for the future of the board and the people of Ross Valley. It is not in my personal best interest to raise my rates in Larkspur 30% or 35%. I'm voting against my best interest, but I'm voting in the best interest of the people of the Ross Valley to have this pollution, which it really is, pollution, cleaned up. We spill a lot of water, we send a lot of water to the treatment plant, but every day we send sewage into our soil, into our streams, because it's just leaking out of our pipes. They're just leaking all the time. We have 200 miles of our pipes and 200 miles that belong to the citizens, and all 400 miles leak. And they leak sewage into the soil. So that's something that needs to be done. So that's one thing. The second thing is, the reason that we got a single number is we said we want to have best practice. We said we'd like to have reserve funds. I think it's duplicitous to say we want to have a reserve fund and then say we don't need to have a reserve fund. We said we want to have a reserve fund, we want it to be such and such a size, and we want the best practice. We want to know what the rates need to be in order to meet best practices in the industry. And so we said that to Vivian, so she would work on her plan, and then we said it to John. What are the best numbers that you can give us that will meet these best practices?
Industry best practices.
Industry best practices, and that's the number that we started with. We've decided not to do best practice. We've backed off from best practice. We will have the future board, the citizens will have a decreased reserve because we've decided to lower the amount of money that should be going into the reserve fund. That's okay as long as all good things happen, as long as we have 5 years of good luck. And if we don't have one or two disastrous mains collapse, like the Magnolia main that collapsed and cost us a couple $1 million, then that'll be great. And you don't need to be best practice. You can skate a little bit thin. But we asked for best practice, and that's why we got a single number. And I think that the water board is going to be very pleased if we do this, and it's going to be very displeased if we don't.
So Pam?
I would really prefer a full board to vote on this. And Mary, I was just curious, do you have anything? Or you just kind of
I believe, no, I would say, I believe that the Section 8 gives us all the flexibility in the world to consider everything that you raised as we go along year to year to year. I put these numbers next to Sam Fell's, rate increase that was adopted without,
Blinking an eye.
without media attention last year, and ours are less. So this is not unreasonable, and we have flexibility. However, you know, as we all do, we do have a deadline. We do have to provide the State Regional Water Quality Board with a multi-year proposal to do what we've already told them in previous reports we're going to do.
Well, how about this? If, I don't mean to cut you off, but I just want to throw that out there. If we continue it till next week, and if Frank's playing, whatever happens, and then we'll just do the vote on that.
No, I think we vote now, and then if it fails now, it can be voted again next week. But I think it's critical that we do our job, and our job is that we do this.
Okay. Procedurally, is that appropriate? We can vote now. If it fails, we can re-agendize these same
We can,
items?
and there's,
Do we have to re-announce?
you mean 218?
Yeah.
No.
No.
The 218 's done. You have an option of voting tonight. You have an option to do a motion to continue. You have an option of providing some changes to the ordinance so that we could bring it back, but I didn't hear anything about the actual ordinance besides the rates, so. But, the one thing that I do say about voting and having it fail tonight, I don't know how closely the water board's watching this, but I think that's an interesting issue for them, and it's an interesting issue for future bonding, it sends a message that this board may not be united, and that's one of my concerns about, and that's just the fallout from not getting rates passed. But you can vote tonight, and then we can put it on the agenda again, or you can continue it.
I think given that we should continue it.
I have no interest in continuing, so vote me down. I move that we adopt Sanitary District Number 1, Ordinance Number 65, as presented.
And this is an aye vote.
Hold on, Peter. You understand.
I
I understand you're very frustrated.
I
but-
understand not voting next week, too. I understand delinquency, I understand failure to do your job, I understand all kinds of things. And I think that the public needs to have a response from the board. And a no vote from Pam is perfectly acceptable as a response.
I'm not going to vote now.
There's going to be an abstaining vote.
So I just think
Well,
this
there's a vote on the
impacts.
floor.
There needs to be a second.
Yeah, I'll second that, but it really should be voting of the hands, or however you want to do it.
Oh,
Roll call.
Roll call. I mean.
So, let me understand what's happening here.
But you do understand what happened.
Okay.
And we have the,
I wish I could read the tea leaves a little better than I feel like I can at this moment. However, if we do not pass this motion tonight, even if we were to bring it back next week, we may disadvantage ourselves in the future.
The disadvantage or advantage is going to be whether or not we vote to adopt the ordinance, adopt the rates, and bond. That's the key thing.
Yeah.
It's in behavior. It's not in what someone is reading in tea leaves, or whether someone thinks we're doing, we're not a united
I'll
board.
vote the same next week, too, by the way. No one's going to talk me out of it. No one's going to come to my house and talk me out of it. And I recommend all board members vote their consciences, not necessarily what select few people say to them.
Well, Can I make a
To do the
suggestion?
right thing.
And having not confusing the process. If the goal is to, Pam, your primary concern I'm hearing is the having a full 5 members of the board for the vote. Is there consensus amongst the 4 board members this evening as to what the content of the rate ordinance should be? So in other words, are we, is there?
Well, I still am kind of on the fence at 7. I think it's too high, but
Okay.
I want to vote because I want to move ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, and something has to be done.
Okay.
So I'm not going to get everything I want, obviously,
Okay.
and what I feel and what I think should be appropriate, but that's just where it goes. I mean, even on the $40 million bond, it's still not sold that we're going to use that money.
Bond's not before us tonight.
Bond's not part of it, it's just the rate.
Yeah, the bond isn't part of what you're voting on tonight, but the one thing that, this ordinance has this chart, and this is the same chart that's going to be next week. And if you try to change it next week, it's not going to be before you, and we're not going to be able to approve
I get
the
it.
rate.
I get it.
That's what I was getting at, I guess, thank you.
And
I
then where you have
say
2
that
days
very well.
or so to get to the board.
So is there
Well,
any?
don't, I'm not,
You're not voting on it.
Was
I'm
there
not
any-
going there.
No,
You're
I
asking
just
me
want to
how I
be
wanna
prepared.
vote.
I just want to be
You're
prepared.
asking me
All right,
how
I'll
I
go.
wanna vote then.
I just want to
We have
be, Pam,
Aye.
I want to be prepared for next week. No, I think so.
Well, that's why I
You say
wanted to
aye?
extend
There's a
it.
motion on the floor.
Yes, we have a motion on the floor.
And a second.
And a second. Sullivan, Wasco. And it is a roll call vote because it is an ordinance.
Yes.
And so, you call the roll.
All right, so, Director Egger is absent. Director Glasgow,
Aye.
Higgs, abstain. Sullivan,
Yes.
Zilla,
Yes? All right, the motion did not pass. We needed 4 votes. And so is it appropriate to propose?
Give direction to staff to bring the ordinance back to next. We
Next
don't
week.
need a motion, it's just direction. And, you know, I just wanted to be clear on the ordinance if there was going to be any suggested
There can't
changes.
be.
Yeah, that's all I just wanted to know.
All right.
Next week should be very interesting.
With that, I
Make sure
believe,
you make time to come see us next week.
I believe we are adjourned. Thank you all.